Members, I now call to order the meeting. There are 2 hours for this session. It will end at 1 p.m. First of all, I would like to welcome the Financial Secretary, the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, and other government officials to the meeting. First of all, may I invite the Financial Secretary to do a briefing. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, good morning, members. I'm glad to come to the Finance Committee to answer questions from members on the budget. In compiling the budget, I personally chaired over 40 sessions, consultation sessions. I'm grateful to many members here who attended those sessions, and I'm very much grateful to all the invaluable views given by the public. Now, there are 3 main objectives for this budget. That is to diversify the economy and provide more opportunities for young people. The second objective is to invest in the future. We're facing an aging population. We face immense challenges, so we need to make early planning for resources and services. We must also improve the quality of living in Hong Kong, so Hong Kong becomes an ideal smart city to live and work in. The third objective is caring and sharing. We need to give support to the disadvantaged. We also need to offer relief to the middle class. So therefore, we have proposed quite a number of initiatives here in the budget. And also, a fulfilling life is not just about materialistic improvements, so we need to enrich district and cultural arts and sports facilities so as to enhance the quality of life. Now, this budget is to ensure there are various resources to implement the initiatives announced in the policy address. We also take a forward-looking approach and we're being proactive in proposing a number of new initiatives. We're going to step up our effort in promoting the development of innovation and technology. We're going to set aside 5 money for developing 4 areas of about innovation and technology, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, smart city, and fintech. We will also give more support to pillar industries, including tourism and so on. And in light of public concern about healthcare, from the next financial year, we're going to increase the recurrent budget for the hospital authority by $6 billion. We're also going to provide $30 billion for the second 10-year hospital building program. We will also there will also be improvement to the clinic facilities, and we're also going to provide more places for medical students. We will also be giving resources for stepping up training of medical staff. There will be opportunities for continuing education. The budget also proposes to promote improvement to sports culture and cultural facilities. There will be additional resources for the elderly, people with disabilities, and the disadvantaged, so they get better care. Now, since we have huge surplus this year, so I have proposed a series of tax concession measures so we can share the fruits of our prosperity with the public. There will be wider tax base, salaries tax concession. There will be higher tax deduction for dependent parents and so on. We will also invite the Community Care Fund to consider providing short-term relief measures to the end-nothings. Now, given the economic performance, about the performance of Hong Kong last year and the projections in future, I will invite my colleagues to give a briefing. May I now invite the Secretary for Financial Services and Treasury to take you through the highlights of the budget. After that, we will be happy to take questions from members. Well, there are some 30 members wishing to ask questions. We have just 2 hours, so please be very concise. Thank you. The Financial Secretary has already shown you, has already highlighted the key points in the budget. Now, I'd like to brief you on our public finance strategy and our medium-range forecast. Please, hold on, please. What is the point of order? Dr. K.K. Kwok. Now, the PowerPoint is very much similar to what the Financial Secretary said. Can we condense this part? Because there are 30 members waiting to speak. If you have to go through the entire PowerPoint, then fewer members would get a chance to speak. So please, can you keep it to 5 minutes? Yes, I can do that. I would just highlight a few points. In that case, let us look at our economic forecast. For 2017, we have good performance, 3.8% real growth of the GDP. Next year, we expect the forecast is 3 to 4%. We have considered inflation, the CCPI, and so on. So the inflation is 2.5%. Last year, the surplus was for the last year it would be $138 billion, $64 billion for operating reserve, and $74 billion for capital reserve. Perhaps I will explain briefly how we're going to make use of our surplus. Now we're going to share part of it with the public. There are various caring and sharing measures altogether adding up to $54 billion. $9.1 billion for CSSA, elderly healthcare vouchers, so social welfare in general. $9.1 billion. And then we also have concession measures for salaries tax, rates, rebates, and so on for $3.3 billion. In total, $54 billion. As for investing in the future, we will spend $84 billion. That's on education, arts and culture, sports, healthcare, and so on. Some of the initiatives are to plan for to prepare for the aging population. So we have set aside another $300 billion for the second 10-year hospital construction program, so we could improve services and so on. Next year, our revenue would be lower than that for 2017 to 18. It will be about $604 billion. Now the consolidated surplus, $46.6 billion, which is higher than the original forecast. So this is to show you that for the nominal GDP, that's the dotted line there you see at the bottom, government spending, the red line, the recurrent spending, the blue line. You can see both the blue and red lines are higher than the line for nominal GDP. That means we are investing in resources to promote economic development. For recurrent government spending, here, compared to 2013 to 14 and 2018-19, you can see a high rate of growth. For education, about 5.9% in growth. Social welfare, 9.1%. Healthcare, 7.4%. Another total recurrent spending, an increase of 7.4%. And the nominal GDP growth is only 5.7%. So you can see that our total increase in spending is more or less the same as nominal GDP growth. Now, in particular, on education, social welfare, healthcare, we are plowing in more resources. For the next year, 2018 to 19 revenue estimates, we're talking about recurrent revenue, and there are other less stable revenue. Land premium, for instance, we estimate it to be $121 billion, which is about 1/5 of the estimates. Stamp duty, we estimate it to be $100 billion, but stamp duty really depends on the transaction volume in the stock market and the property market. So this is rather volatile. Now I will go faster. For 2018 to 19 recurrent expenditure estimates, the three main shares, education 20.8%, social welfare spending altogether 19.6%, healthcare care 17.5%. Altogether, they account for 60% of our expenditure. The increase is substantial, actually. Fiscal reserves at the end of 2018 to 19, we estimate our fiscal reserve to stand at 1,138.6 billion dollars. That's equivalent to 24 months of government expenditure. If you look at the line, then by 2022 to 23, with a continuous increase in spending, that will be an equivalent of 21 months of government spending. So we can see the government is continuing to plow in more resources on spending. 2018 medium range forecast for 2018 to 2019 for the capital account, there will be a surplus. In the next few years, there will still be a surplus. You might ask, in the past, we have forecasted by 2021, 22, or 22, 23, there could be a consolidated deficit. That's because we have reviewed our economic growth. For the medium-range forecast, originally it's 2.7% in GDP growth per year, but now it's been revised to 3 to 4%. That's to reflect our investment in innovation and technology for this term of the government. So that's why we're able to increase the medium-term forecast. So that's why for the next 5 years we expect a consolidated surplus. So perhaps I'll stop here. 33 members have indicated they wish to speak. If I give you 3 minutes, you won't have enough time probably, but let's keep it to 4 minutes. Can I ask the Financial Secretary to stay a little longer, and at most up to 1:10, because he has other engagements. So 4 minutes, strictly 4 minutes for questions and answers, because otherwise other members don't get a chance to speak. Mr. Michael Tian, thank you. Yesterday at the press conference, you said you are considering a tax deduction for rental expenses. I must compliment you for that, because our group, when we met you, this was our main request. Now, many tenants actually suffer more than property owners, so please do something about that as soon as possible. But then I have to pursue you on one thing. Just now, the Secretary said that in 22-23 there would be a deficit, and that is shocking. Now, when we submitted our proposals, first of all, you talk about tax reform. Now, whether you accept our proposal or not, at the very least, you need to start studying the matter. It's for your own benefit. Financial Secretary, yesterday, you were criticized for getting the estimate wrong every year. And you said it's difficult for the government to predict the amount of income. And you know, this week there's wide division in society. There are 2 schools, one asking for a cash handout, the others not. So you need to change the tax structure. Now, you said it's not time to consider it yet because we have enough money. But then just now we're told that by 22-23 there may be a deficit. So I don't agree with what you say. Must you wait till there is a deficit in 22-23 before you consider it? No, anyway, what I want to ask is that the last budget was from you as well. Financial Secretary, there was $90 billion in surplus. This year, over $100 billion, so it's substantial. In the last budget, you said that there is a narrow tax base. You said you're going to set up a group to consider it. And you say you're going to consider widening the sources of revenue and so on, so that it could support the tax revenue could support development in society. How come all this is not mentioned this year in the budget? What about that working group? What is it looking into now? Last year, I complimented you. I said you were the first financial secretary in 40 years to have the courage to say that we need to consider the taxation regime.
Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tian, for your questions and comments, and thank you for your group for the written submission and your comments. You have submitted a very detailed submission. Well, we talked about a deficit, well, when for the capital account and the operating account, after offsetting the two accounts, on the whole, there should be a surplus because of the favorable external economic environment, but it's uncertain. But there will be U.S. interest hikes, right? It depends, and it will also affect the degree of the surplus. As for the tax base and the tax regime, we also take note of the issue. When I was answering the journalist's question yesterday, I said that it isn't the right time to put up a proposal for discussion in the community. So you're working on it. But on this point, we need to be prepared. We need to prepare for a study. In 2006, the administration floated the idea of a GST with some basic design of the proposal. So we did have some data, and for the medium to long term or short to medium term goal of the working group. So you're not changing your stance. You're still looking into it, right? So last year I praised you, and I was right. Next, Dr. Low Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. Financial Secretary, the Business Professional Alliance will give you a very favorable comment of your budget this year. We believe that in terms of innovation and caring and sharing with the community, investing in the future, etc., well, unprecedentedly, you have invested $50 billion on innovation and technology. And it is a very positive, a very much welcome initiative. In terms of other investments, we should support it, as these are investments into the future. For example, healthcare system, and for the second 10-year hospital development plan, there will be $300 billion invested in the hardware of healthcare facilities, and we support that. Another $1 billion for the construction industry, so that I&T can be applied in the construction process, and of course we support that as well. However, it all boils down to a very important issue, that is human capital. In various paragraphs of the budget, the Financial Secretary already mentioned how manpower or better support should be provided to the manpower of various industries. And although there is a suggestion that there should be enhancement of imported labor on an appropriate scale, on the whole, the manpower situation is really tight, because I could say that the unemployment rate is very low at the moment. And against this background, how do we resolve the issue of manpower in terms of quantity and quality? I'd like to have an answer from this Financial Secretary. Another point I'm not satisfied with is this. Many members are of the view that you need to really kickstart the fourth public transport or the CTS, the study, territory-wide public transport study, because we need an in-principle enhancement to our existing systems. We need to kickstart the fourth round study. Financial Secretary, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Low, for your questions. In terms of the comprehensive transport study, in preparing this year's budget, in terms of our investment in the transport infrastructure in Hong Kong, and how we could make the transportation more convenient for the public, we do give priority in our consideration. I think for the Transport and Housing Bureau, it will also actively follow up on the transport and traffic arrangements. Earlier, the expansion plan on railway system up to 2030, the RDS was announced, but this is not sufficient. We should focus on the NT East and NT West, and it is also important to follow up on other aspects. As for the labor force and human capital, it is true that certain sectors are experiencing manpower shortage, such as the healthcare industry. In the policy address it was mentioned, and also construction industry is another example. Without affecting the employment prospect of local workers and their income, we can, on an appropriate scale and at an appropriate time, import more labor. And the Chief Secretary for Administration is leading a committee for manpower planning to take a holistic view of the matter, and he will continue to coordinate the work in this regard. As for human capital, we have a talents checklist. This is undertaken by the Labour and Welfare Bureau. Ms. Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chairman. The Financial Secretary claims to be very familiar with the global economy. However, in terms of the ideology of people around the world, you really lack knowledge. In terms of animal rights, the advocates in Hong Kong are very unhappy with you because out of the blue, you are dishing out $310 million to the Ocean Park. The global trend is that the performance venues for ocean animals should be closed down gradually because these are caged animals and these are not education tools. You talked about education tourism and it's treated as a tourism project. And then the Ocean Park will be distributing 10,000 free tickets to primary and secondary students. But we have 700 to 800,000 primary and secondary students in Hong Kong. So how will that be properly distributed? Just 10,000 tickets. And what about education tourism? Why don't you go to the wetland park instead? And why don't you work with the conservation groups on the conservation of, say, Chinese white dolphins, community cattle, and even cats and dogs? What kind of education tourism is that? Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Claudia Mo, for your questions. In terms of the Ocean Park, Ms. Claudia Mo, on animal rights, the Ocean Park also attaches great importance to the issue. In the past few years, in terms of performance shows, the way it is done is very much different from what it used to be when the Ocean Park was first established. So it's attaching importance to animal rights. No, but there is a fox rescued, and they originally did not want to adopt that fox because of media pressure. They ultimately provided the home for the fox. Well, in terms of animal rights, for individual cases, you can go on and talk about $310 million. Please allow me to finish. The Ocean Park is a popular attraction for locals and the local families. In the past few years, we've understood that in terms of the operations of the Ocean Park and the financial position of the Ocean Park, they are experiencing difficulties. For the 10,000 admission tickets, please don't be mistaken. It's out of the goodwill of the Ocean Park that 10,000 free admission tickets would be given to students. Through this allocation of funds, I would like to help Ocean Park enhance its service. Instead of giving cash handouts to save Hong Kong people, you save the Ocean Park instead. You're providing relief and aid to the Ocean Park. Ms. Claudia Mo, I don't think that we should mix up the two subjects. The Ocean Park is, the Ocean Park belongs to the Hong Kong people as a major amusement park and a tourism infrastructure facility. We should improve the service quality and capacity so that it could better meet the community's needs because it's very much welcomed by families. All right, what about the $310 million? Well, Mr. Edward Yao could provide you with the figures. It will be broken down into several projects to be phased in several years. It's backed by evidence. What about without or nothing households? You're going to invite CCF to consider short-term relief measures. That means they get nothing at all, not a penny. Whereas $310 million for the Ocean Park, and you find this appropriate? Time is up for nothing individuals. We are going to provide relief measures through the Community Care Fund. As for the details, I need to respect the advisory committee of the CCF. I understand that they will actively respond to the community's aspirations. Next, Mr. Kwok Wai-keung. This year we have a huge surplus, and there is a very reasonable expectation that the success should be shared by all. We talked about sharing across different strata of the community. And then the huge surplus should be shared. As for the $52.4 billion surplus, out of that, $43.3 billion are spent on tax rebates and rates waivers, and also $9.1 billion on relief measures for social security recipients, etc. They will get a triple pay, so to speak. For the self-reliant ones, for families which do not usually rely on the government, they do not stand to benefit. And for youths, for younger elderly, aged 64 to 69, they get nothing as well. What about transport subsidy, healthcare initiative, etc.? Nothing at all. Business startups, last year, $90 billion surplus would allow them a license fee waiver, but not this year. So the financial secretary seems to be ignoring the needs of the lower to middle class, so that the surplus is not shared by everyone. And also, the government has emphasized that the one-off surplus should not be used to support long-term policies, whereas for innovation and technology, there is a largesse of $500 billion to catch up with the world, so to speak. So why is it that you're taking $50 billion out of the $138 billion surplus solely on innovation technology? You're giving a misconception to the public that you are gambling with a huge stake on I&T. It's really difficult to share the success of I&T. So how are you going to properly monitor the use of funds? And it's also costly. How are you going to make sure that the I&T will bring about benefits in downstream operations, such as grooming of talents, etc., so that the investment will be sound? Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your questions. Regarding the $138 billion surplus, $20 billion will be earmarked for innovation and technology, $10 billion related to the science park, and also $7 billion will be spent on supporting the science park and the startups which will be operating in the science park. Also, $10 billion will be spent on, like I said, science park. Another $10 billion will be spent on two areas, biotechnology and AI, artificial intelligence, as I said yesterday. As for the $20 billion on the Lok Ma Chau Loop, the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Technology Park, we have quite abundant surplus this year. So naturally, we spent more from the surplus on this area, $52 billion, some 40% of the surplus. But at the same time, we need to look after the grassroots. So for CSSA recipients, low-income families, transport subsidy, etc., we have actually increased the amount.
Dr. K.K. Kwok, 4 minutes. I see the Financial Secretary has worked very hard on his budget. I wonder if you have taken note of the ratings by the public is record low. Why? Because there are young people still struggling. They can't meet the eligibility criteria under the Community Care Fund. They can't get into public housing and tax deduction. They don't benefit much because they only earn $10,000 or so, and they have no hope at all buying their homes and so on. Anyway, I won't talk about that. What is important is about healthcare. I welcome some of the initiatives you've announced, like increasing spending and taking forward hospital development. But even if there's an increase in current spending, it's a small percentage of total spending as a whole compared to 4 years ago. Because why? We have an aging population. After 8 years, 1/4 of the population is elderly, and the percentage will keep going up. So you're just trying to catch up now. Now, I welcome taking forward the second phase of the 10-year hospital development plan, but for some hospitals like the Tuen Mun hospitals or Princess Margaret hospitals, they are totally overcrowded. So can you do something, especially for Tuen Mun Hospital, there's no space for expansion. Can you start the redevelopment now? Don't wait till after 2025. Otherwise, you're telling residents of NT West that they won't see any improvement for another decade or so. That's the first point. Secondly, now, even both you and Carrie Lam saying that you provide resources for buying expensive drugs. In the formulary, hospital authority formulary, there are just 12,095 items. 77 items are 77 expensive drugs have to be purchased by patients. For Samaritan Fund case, let's say for a family, if they have income of $300,000 a year, and for expensive drugs, we're talking about spending $100,000. So are you saying that people have to use up all the resources? They won't even be able to pay for their funeral. So only then would you hand them out this assistance. No, so can you give an undertaking for the expensive drugs and for the chronically ill? Please waive the eligibility, the means test for them, because targeted drugs, they could only afford to pay for the drugs, say, for 3 months, and at the end they use up their money. They still end up not keeping their life. So can you please allow some time for the Financial Secretary to answer your questions? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You see, I have asked the hospital authority to take forward the planning for the second 10-year hospital development plan, and that includes Tuen Mun Hospital. Now, Dr. Kwok asked whether the redevelopment of Tuen Mun Hospital could be advanced. I will take your view back to the Revenue Bureau and the hospital authority. For expensive drugs for rare diseases, the hospital authority is now doing review. It hopes to expand the scope of subsidy for drugs. And for rare diseases which require expensive drugs, the hospital authority will review how to improve upon the mechanism, especially for the cost-sharing scheme, so as to lessen the burden on patients. Please let me finish. Now, the review will be completed in the middle of the year, and I'm already providing the additional resources. That means they have a lot more to spend. The $500 million is not for generating interest, but rather this $500 million could be used when necessary. Ms. Alice Mack, thank you for taking on board the views of of our federation. That is, you will have a steering committee that's led by the Chief Secretary to coordinate services for the ethnic minorities. I hope there will soon be details on how you're going to spend the $500 billion. And so we also support you providing substantial resources for training of healthcare professionals, because apart from the hardware, it's important too that in terms of software there is training for professionals, doctors, nurses, dentists, and so on. So this time around you are being very generous in providing substantial resources for improving healthcare manpower, and we support that. I hope you will apply the same principle, though, to the other industries, construction industries and elderly care industries, which you mentioned earlier. Now, you said there may be a need for suitable importation of labor. But if you believe there is a shortage of manpower in these industries, please deal with them in the same way as you deal with the healthcare professionals. That is, you will offer substantial resources for training local workers, so we will have enough local supply instead of just considering importing labor. If you think we can do that for healthcare, we have the resources to address the manpower shortage in the healthcare sector. How come for the construction sector or the elderly care sector, they cannot be given hundreds of millions of dollars for more training. So I think you must first deal with training of local workers. Third point, now you're not going to give cash handout. When we asked for cash handout, someone came forward to object to that. Okay, now you're not giving out any cash handout. What about people in petitioned rooms? They are not qualified to pay tax. They are not getting CSSA. They don't get any allowances. Their children don't get textbook allowance. They rely on themselves. How are they going to benefit from your budget? How are you going to be answerable to this group? We just don't want conflicts. We don't want division in society. We want everybody to share in the fruits of our development. So how are you going to share the fruits of our development with this particular group? Financial Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Alice Mack. For the $500 million for ethnic minorities, as you mentioned, the Chief Secretary will chair a committee. For the ethnic minorities and NGOs, we will allow sufficient room for discussion with them as to how we can make use of this sum of money. So after discussion with them, then we will be able to announce the details. Through discussion with them, we will know exactly what their needs are. On manpower training, as you said, through the Construction Industry Council, we have been providing them with various resources to train local construction workers and to upgrade their skills. We will continue to do that with full force. Now, for certain industries, it's true there is a shortage of manpower. Now, we also need to upgrade existing services to address the immediate needs. At the same time, we need to protect our local workers in terms of their income and rights. But at the same time, we believe it is suitable to have certain importation of labor. It will be a targeted approach to help those with needs. And also, we want to cast the net as wide as possible. That's why we consider our current approach a balanced one. Thank you. Mr. Michael Locke. Thank you. I see there are several concepts of the government, in terms of investment. You are investing substantially in innovation and technology, $50 billion. The second concept is about returning money to the taxpayers. So there are various tax concessions, including rates rebate. And then there is part about helping the disadvantaged, caring and sharing measures, triple payment for CSSA recipients, higher amount for healthcare voucher for the elderly and so on. But there is an important concept that is missing. You don't have the concept of sharing, of giving bonus to all in the community, because all in the community are like shareholders of a company. If the company makes a windfall, then shouldn't there be a mechanism to share that with the shareholders? In this case, everyone in the community. Now, you say you want across the sector measures, but then you're actually skipping certain sectors, the sandwich class. They don't pay tax and they don't collect benefits, and they have overlooked their needs. So you really have to consider how you're going to make up to this particular group. These are the people who don't benefit from any of the tax concessions or relief measures. Now, Dr. Kwokake said many criticized this budget severely. There's a very low score for this budget. It's because there's no cash handout. Now, of course, the political party of Dr. Kwokake is against cash handout. But this decision of not giving cash handout, is it your own decision, or is it the part of the decision of the Executive Council, or were you under pressure by certain political parties so you decided not to give cash handout? Can I ask you about that, please? And then another point, looking at the government budget or estimates, you're spending $9.1 billion on social welfare. triple payment of CSSA, and additional $1,000 for elderly health care vouchers. So this is how you share the surplus. Now for this $9.1 billion, could it be included in next year's estimate? Because for 2018-19, we estimate $46.6 billion in surplus. So if this $9.1 billion is counted towards that year, then can you deal with it like you are giving up bonus to everybody? So that then truly you are sharing the fruits of a success across the sectors. Financial Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Look. Now, as I said, in sharing the surplus with the people, we want a targeted approach. So that's why in designing the initiatives to share the surplus, we have given play to the fiscal philosophy of this term of government. That is, we mustn't do things aimlessly. We must take a targeted approach. So that's our consideration. Mr. Lok mentioned views expressed in the community. Well, actually, there are both for and against views in the community. As the Financial Secretary, I would consider the overall interest of the community. I will have regard to the needs of the overall community, present needs and future needs, and then I try to strike a balance. Now, Finance Secretary, let me tell you this. There are many people who support the government, but they're very angry that you're not giving cash handouts now. Mr. Ronick Chen, thank you. In the new fiscal philosophy, you say the government must be forward-looking and must take a strategic approach. I agree, and I definitely agree that you need to invest in the future. Now, Hong Kong is considered a developed economy, but the IMF has reported that we are the only of the 35 advanced economies that's had surplus for 11 years in a row. Now, by 2022-23, do you expect the reserve to reach 1,922 billion dollars? But still, you are not returning wealth to the public. You hand over the surplus to the exchange fund for management, and the exchange fund tends to be conservative in this investment. So would you cap our fiscal reserve? Yes, spending patterns change, but perhaps on a rolling basis, if there is surplus outside the limit, then you could do more in terms of relief measures. As for adding value to our reserve, apart from leaving it to the exchange fund to manage it, would you consider setting up a sovereign fund like some countries do, so there would be more flexibility in investment? And also, I think the financial industry is, of course, important. We need to train up a talent pool. Now, but you say it's only idea. Is there any implementation timetable? What about the amount for this academy for training of finance, and how is it different from bachelor courses provided by universities, for instance?
Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chen, for the questions. As for the level of reserve, we don't believe that this is an appropriate juncture to draw a line here. As you can see, starting from this year, in the next few years, the public spending to GDP ratio will exceed the previous threshold of not exceeding 20% of GDP. In fact, according to the recent estimates, it will go beyond 21%. That is, in the face of various needs in the community and the need to enhance facilities that are lagging behind with the times, we also need to invest in the future. So the public spending increase far exceeds the growth in our GDP. We are in a transitioning period to meet communities' aspirations. so that our facilities and services can be enhanced as soon as possible. We are a small economy. We are also susceptible to external headwinds. In 2018-19, in terms of land sale revenue and stamp duty revenue, we recorded a very high revenue, which has helped a lot. However, if there are external changes or changes in the external environment, it will have a major impact on us. We therefore need to maintain a stable level of reserves. As for the future fund, as mentioned by Mr. Chan, and also sovereign fund, at the moment, the HKMA is in charge of investing our money in the long-term growth portfolio with a very good return of 12 to 13% over the past period of time, and they need to look for projects. Mr. Ip Kin Yuen. Chairman, I once proposed to the government to include the DSE exam fees in part of the free education initiatives, but it should be limited to the daytime, full-time students. Now, in this budget, the initiative is subsidy will be provided to DSE exam students. This morning, the Financial Secretary said on the radio phone-in program that the subsidy will also cover self-study students apart from full-time students. And there is a major concern here because a lot of people will become self-study students. Well, some of them might want to take the exam to make their certificate look better. Some people might want to include in their CV that they get 5++, so as to become a tutor. And also, for some others, should time and cost allows, they would not like to give a try because it's different from the Hong Kong CEE. And I also had friends who've told me that they would like to give a try at the liberal studies exam because they haven't tried it before. That means a lot of people would be motivated to take the exam. And they might interfere with the exam results. We think that this is a major concern because, first of all, exam venues are limited. We need to have examiners, etc. And we also need to be aware of interference with the whole procedure. And teachers are already concerned because for oral exams, well, if the candidates already have very high caliber, then it might affect the exam as a whole. For daytime schools, we have about 50,000 students. That's a figure from last year. Self-study students, around 10,000, close to 15%. So if the figure doubles, and there will be a major impact. Even if it doesn't double as such, there will still be an impact. This morning, in the phone-in program, a member of the public asked what happens if some candidates take the exam just for fun. The Financial Secretary said that he has absolute confidence that they will be excluded. But examination is something that we really attach great importance to. And if there is interference, they will have a major impact. And this morning, I already received phone calls from parents and teachers telling us that they are against your proposal. Some parents who benefit from your scheme would say that they do not want to take the risk because they do not want their children's results to be affected. So my suggestion is very simple, Chairman. Can you limit the DSE exam fee subsidy to daytime school, daytime full-time students or day school candidates? Financial Secretary. The intention is that some young people might have scored pretty badly in previous exams, and they would like to have a go again as self-study candidates, and that is why they should be included in the subsidy so as to give young people more opportunities. And as for Mr. Ip Kin Yun's comments, I will look into that. Mr. Gary Chen, Financial Secretary, the DAB commented on your budget yesterday, and we believe that there is a lack of sharing the success with all. Although 40% of the surplus will be shared with the public, including the middle class, elderly, the disadvantaged, they will all be captured by different initiatives. But a lot of people from the grassroots have told me that they do not get a share. We have employees, grassroots workers telling us that they work very long hours all through the day, and they struggle hard to make ends meet, and they don't benefit from the budget. And there are also elderly people just retired, above the age of 60, and they are using their own savings. They do not get any government benefits. They do not have retirement protection. They get nothing from your budget. So, Financial Secretary, what measures do you have to help these two types of grassroots, as I mentioned? Paying the PRH rent on their behalf, or the elderly healthcare voucher scheme? Can you lower the age limit to 60? Will you consider these two suggestions to make up for the insufficient sweeteners in your budget? Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your questions. In allocating our surplus this year to different aspects, we have taken note of the suggestions floated by political parties and communities, and whether we can pay rent for PRH tenants. But we don't think it's appropriate to take a broad brush approach, because for PRH tenants, quite a lot of them are elderly people. In terms of the elderly healthcare voucher scheme and also the allowances for elderly people, we have increased the amount quite substantially. So they are the major beneficiaries. There are also CSSA recipients and also recipients of various allowances who are PRH tenants. So in sharing the economic success, for example, we offer 3 months payment to these recipients. So they are looked after. Public housing itself is a major form of social welfare or support for them. Having considered the above reasons, we don't think it is appropriate to pay rent for the PRH tenants across the board. Now, in terms of the elderly healthcare voucher scheme, because of this year's huge surplus, we have increased the voucher amount by $1,000. As for the allocation of surplus or distributing surplus, we need to take a targeted approach, especially the grassroots. And in the consultation process, we've heard a lot of views that apart from the grassroots, other middle class people in employment also bear the brunt. So in terms of tax concessions, rates waivers, we have stepped up our effort such that in the present environment, we can do our best to look after those in need. We find our proposal the right balance. There are also other measures sprinkled in different areas such as sports, continuing education, etc. All these are measures benefiting the people. Sorry, Chairman, I'd like to remind the Secretary that in terms of public rental housing, we have a lot of employees who do not enjoy any support from the budget. Next, Mr. Felix Chung. Thank you, Chairman. I welcome the tax concessions and rates waivers in this budget. A lot of middle class and SMEs would benefit. But the surplus is so huge, I think this Financial Secretary should do more so as to benefit more. As mentioned just now, there are people who are not enjoying the benefit of the budget. In the coming 5 years, according to the forecast, there will still be a surplus. The previous financial secretary used to say we have a structural deficit, but I see that we're having a structural surplus instead. Especially, there is nothing on the reserves in the exchange fund. Altogether, we have $1,000 billion on our reserves. Altogether, some $4,000 billion in our reserves. So let's say with a very good return of 5%, every year the investment return would reach $200 billion. So we're just talking about the interest. And it will be equivalent to 30 to 40% of government spending. I don't see a really I don't see any financial hardship at the moment, and I do think that the government has the means to reduce the profits tax from 16.5% to 15%, especially all around the world. The advanced economies are also cutting taxes, Singapore, the US. So if you can also implement tax cuts, you'll be able to attract investments and more enterprises and also boost economic activities. In the coming 5 years, since there will still be such a huge surplus, I hope the Financial Secretary will consider reducing profit tax. Second point, this morning I heard members of the public ask about the stopping of the waiver for business registration fees. In fact, the business registration fee also cover levy of the protection of wage against the PWIF levy, protection of wages against insolvency fund. So I wonder, since we have such a huge surplus, you can include this part as well. Financial Secretary, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zhong, for your questions. We do not have reserves as much as $4,000 billion. $200 billion surplus. This is really high. This is an overestimate. Well, in fact, Mr. Norman Chan already announced that we have $270 billion, an investment return rate of 7%. Now, as for the reserves used for investment by the Hong Kong MA, is calculated for a period of 6 years, and it's not as much as $4,000 billion, because for the Hong Kong MA, the exchange fund consists of foreign currencies being converted into Hong Kong dollars, and they could be converted back to foreign currencies, not for investment. As for profits tax, as I mentioned, the tax rate at the moment is competitive. We therefore do not believe that we should reduce the tax rates across the board. As for initiatives targeting different industries, as promotion measures and tax concessions, we can look into these ideas. As for the business registration fees, and also the PWIF levy, as pointed out by Mr. Felix Chung, thank you for your comment. I will go back and think about it. Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Chairman. Well, there are groundbreaking ideas in this budget, some good measures, investing into the future in the health care, district facilities, sports, and also some goodies for the middle class who have been waiting for years. But yesterday, we received a lot of criticisms. Just now, Financial Secretary, you talk about even distribution, but the point is, it's not even. For those aged 60 or 64, they get nothing. For the grassroots working very hard, they get nothing either. As long as they are not recipients of any government benefits, they get nothing. For SMEs, they criticize that the business registration fees will no longer be waived. So if you do not come up with ways so that everyone will benefit from the economic success, then for grassroots workers struggling to make ends meet, age 60 to 64, and also the SMEs, they will continue to be aggrieved. And I'm still receiving complaints on my mobile phone. What can you do to make sure that they feel that they are looked after by the government and they also share part of the economic success. Mr. Gary Chan, my fellow party member, already mentioned paying rent for PRH tenants, lowering the age limit for elderly healthcare vouchers to 60, and also the end nothing individuals and households through CCF, and also waiving the business registration fees. All these can plug the loopholes so that you make the distribution more even. You should consider these ideas. You mentioned that for PRH tenants, they are already recipients of some social welfare, CSSA recipients, etc. However, it's not true that the majority of PRH tenants are elderly and CSSA recipients. We have hard-working individuals who are PRH tenants. So paying rent for them will be one way to share the economic success.
Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Kwok, for your questions. Business registration fees. Perhaps I should put it this way. Now, waiving business registration fees is one way to help SMEs, but I think more importantly, we need to help SMEs to do more business. So in the budget, we have a series of measures to support SMEs. For example, there is a dedicated fund on branding, upgrading domestic sales. We are injecting additional funds. And then for the SME development funds, we are injecting $1 billion. And then as for the scope of the schemes, it won't be limited to mainland. Even if they go into the the ASEAN countries, we will give them support, and the subsidy could go up as much as $1 million. Originally, SME support was fund was just subsidy was just $200,000. It's been increased to $400,000, and so on. Yes, we could all read that, Chairman. But how do you address the question of uneven distribution? Can you reconsider it? Would you come back with something that is feasible? Well, we believe our sharing initiatives are rather balanced. As for public rental housing rental, I've explained that already, so I don't propose to repeat myself. Dr. Fernando Cheung. First of all, I would like to thank the Financial Secretary for taking on board our suggestion to provide for persons with disability allowance in the taxation scheme. This will allow persons with disability more opportunities to be integrated in society. But, we have the largest ever surplus this year. So the Treasury is totally flushed with cash. This is also the first year of office for Carrie Lam, and she says she has a new fiscal philosophy. Now, in a capitalist market, it's the survival of the fittest, and that leads to wealth gap. We also have an aging population, so there is uneven and unfair distribution of resources. So, with your budget, how can you use it to help improve the standard of living of the public? How do you help to relieve the burden on the poor? How do you reduce the size of the poor, population of the poor? How do you lift people out of poverty? So we need more resources in education, social and so on. Now, through this budget, are you doing anything to address the wealth gap? No, not at all. The more handouts you give, the more you contribute to the wealth gap. Now, we have done an analysis of the one-off relief measures, rates, waivers, tax concessions and so on. They account for 80% of the $50+ billion. The orange part is for the underprivileged. That is triple payment of CSSA, old age allowance, and so on. So it's not proportionate. That means the more handouts you give, the wider the wealth gap. Let's look at the elderly and the persons with disability. They have the most pressing needs. They need long-term care. There are less than 600 institution places this year. And there are 40,000 on the waiting list every year. Some 6,000 die while waiting. And the hospitals look at that. It's like a war zone. There's a long wait for accident emergency treatment. Then there's a long wait for specialized treatment and so on. And people continue to live in subdivided flats. So how do you realize your goals and your turn into reality, your slogans through the budget? How do you help the disadvantaged? I don't see how you're doing that at all. So you have this so-called new fiscal philosophy. How can you give play to it? How can you redistribute resources so the disadvantaged is given proper care? And for cancer patients who couldn't afford drugs, for patients with rare diseases, how do you help them? So let's not consider cost effectiveness. You should set up a separate fund, but there's no response to that demand. So, Mr. Chen, please, your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Zhang, for your questions. Dr. Zhang, please, when you look at how we care for the disadvantaged, don't just focus on the surplus this year, which is about the part on sharing the surplus with the public. Now, for education, social welfare spending, we have doing a lot to help the disadvantaged. For example, for education, we are now providing more resources so disadvantaged children could take part more in extracurricular activities. This will offer them more opportunities for all-round development. So I don't agree with you. And I don't think you should just focus on the distribution of the surplus this year. You should look at the overall government policies on how we take care of the disadvantaged. Another point, doesn't matter whether it's elderly homes or hospitals, we are determined to make improvement. But it's not just about throwing money at these facilities. We need time for these for the efforts to work for both homes and hospitals. I know the Labour and Welfare Bureau is working very hard in relation to the waiting time. Thank you. Ms. Sari Lee. Financial Secretary says the middle class is suffering, you need to help them. I agree. Now you said you need to invest in the future to address the healthcare and housing issues. I agree. But then repeatedly you said the way you return wealth to the public now is a balanced approach. I beg to differ there. We are able to do more and better. For many salaried in the salaried class, after the budget's announced, they left messages say, I'm a single parent family, I live in a Shamshui private home, and my son, I earn a salary of 8,000 something. We benefit nothing at all from your tax concession and so on. So how are you going to take care of this group? Now you say you don't agree we should reduce rent for public rental housing tenants. I agree, but you know there's a group who wrote to me. They have retired. They are living off their savings, and again, how do you help them? In preparing a budget, have you considered these groups? Now you have received all these messages. So can you consider how you could help these various groups? Financial Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Arlie, for your questions. As we started planning for the budget, distribution of surplus is, of course, one angle. But as I said earlier, apart from sharing out the surplus, we are responding to the needs of the communities through various policies. For example, we're substantially improving healthcare and welfare services. It's because we have an aging population, so there will be increasing demand for healthcare services. That's why we are working very hard on that. For different disadvantaged groups, say for instance persons with disabilities, in the budget, in terms of institution service or support services, we have offered certain initiatives in the budget. So we need to look at the whole picture covering all different aspects. We shouldn't just focus on the distribution of the 40% of the surplus in the budget this year. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need to invest. We all understand you need to invest in the future, but investing in the future is not exclusive of sharing the surplus. Now, because we have the ability to do more, so why don't you do more to benefit these groups? In planning a budget, we have considered the whole picture. As I said, for grassroots who need assistance, we try to take care of them as far as possible in the budget. Well, maybe not everyone is happy with the budget, but we have tried our very best to cast the net as wide as possible. For example, needy students, they will get $2,000 each to help learning needs. Yes, Finance Secretary, I know you're working very hard. You have tried your best. I'm just saying that now the budget's been announced and we still have the capability to do more. Would you consider it? You don't need to answer me today, but really, would you consider there are some groups who are not benefiting from the budget measures? Can we actually afford to do more? Please consider that. Financial Secretary, well, we believe it is about right to distribute 40% of the surplus, and we believe our current arrangement is more or less balanced. Thank you. Mr. James Toh. I hope the Financial Secretary will hear me out here. Now, you met with many friends from the pro-establishment camp. They have sent out strong messages. Now, you delivered the budget yesterday, and then you attended various live programs. Yesterday, when I was following your budget, I felt pain, actually, because when you mentioned tax concession from $20,000 to $30,000. So all our colleagues here could get a tax concession, $30,000. You can get it. What about salaried class who earn the minimum wage? They not earn nothings. They earn about $10,000 or so a month, and they just pay a few dollars in tax. And what about, and you say you are setting aside 40% of a surplus for sharing, but sharing with who and how much? You know, we don't mind if we all have nothing, but we mind when resources are not distributed evenly. So I feel pain reading your budget. I hope you say your colleagues have taken comprehensive view. There's nothing wrong with that. But then you are leaving out 1.8 million people, and they are enraged. You know, I'm a member from the Super DC seat, so I have stronger political sense, I suppose. Now there are 800,000 to 1 million people who are really angry because they think you have deliberately left them out. Now you say if you just distribute 10 or 20% of surplus, you distribute nothing at all, or you just reduce tax concession by $5,000 or so on, it's fine. But here we're talking about offering tax concession $30,000, and you are waiving rates, and consortium could pocket $100 million even in tax rebates, and it's not fair, and you are sowing the seed of instability in society. And then all the other good measures in your budget, say about promoting innovation technology, would be written off altogether by everybody. That's how things work in society. Here, we talk about someone who earns the minimum wage. He gets nothing at all. This morning, I went to a local coffee shop for breakfast. There were a few from the blue camp. They are strong supporters of the government, and they actually question what kind of a government this is. These are not from the yellow camp. These are not people who oppose you politically. And that's what they said. So all I can tell you is that you have to rethink this. The Democratic Party has never taken a lead in supporting cash handout, but having heard your budget yesterday, and we considered it for 10-20 minutes, and then we made a proposal. So please consider it very carefully. Otherwise, this budget of the Carrie Lam's government will start a slide in popularity rating of the government, and it's the start of turbulence in society. Now, if it's Carrie Lam who is against giving a cash handout, now Carrie Lam has to be answerable to the Central People's Government for the instability in society for the next few years. And then this government cannot do anything about the Belt and Road or whatever. Don't even dream about improving his popularity. No chance.
A succinct response, the Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. James To, for his comments. Mr. To asked whether I have deliberately left out some people, and I think it's an exaggeration. This is not true. As for other questions, I've answered them before. I won't repeat. Mr. Lau Yu-chung. Chairman, just now the Financial Secretary said in his reply that he is taking a targeted approach with a particular aim in mind in distributing the surplus in his budget. So how can you say that you're not leaving them out? According to the media, $38 billion are for the middle class and only $12 billion for the grassroots in the ratio of 1:3. Today, according to your figures, things are even worse. For the grassroots, they get $9.1 billion, whereas $43.3 billion will be spent on tax concessions and rates rebates. It's 1 to 5. So you are totally biased in favor of the middle class and totally neglecting the grassroots. Last time, per quarter, the rates rebates was capped at $1,000. Now it's capped at $2,500 per quarter. And like Mr. James To said just now, of the 100 taxpayers, one taxpayer could enjoy $200 or even $300 million of rebates. Is it really returning wealth to the people? Is it really taking a targeted approach? In terms of the wealth gap in Hong Kong, you are totally turning a blind eye to it. You are not addressing it at all. You are widening the gap, rather. So, Financial Secretary, my question is this. Do you understand how serious our wealth gap is? Our Gini coefficient has gone beyond 0.5. It's soon to reach 0.6. So how could you narrow the wealth gap with your budget? I'll give you time to answer my question. Thank you, Chairman. During our consultation, some people, including the elderly people and the retirees, have told us that because of the soaring property prices and rental, their burden is quite a lot, and they hope that we could help alleviate the burden. Well, Financial Secretary, last year, Mr. Ray Chan already criticized you. Rates rebate is totally biased in favor of those you shouldn't offer help in the first place. You haven't answered my question. How are you going to improve the Gini coefficient? How are you going to narrow the wealth gap? FS. Thank you, Chairman. If I may, I'll go on in terms of rates. I already explained that is a major reason why we have increased the amount. As for whether we can be selective in offering rates rebates, we also looked into that. The conclusion drawn is that at the moment there may be variations in different districts. A small rateable property may be more expensive in a certain district than a luxury flat in another remote district. So if we draw a line at, say, $7 million as a rateable property's value, and that not offer rates rebate, so in other words, you're returning wealth only to the wealthy people. Have you taken into account the grassroots situation? Please allow me to finish. Please allow him to finish. You have interjected a number of times. My time is running out. He hasn't answered my question. How is he going to narrow the wealth gap? Financial Secretary, anything to add? He has used up my time, Mr. Yu Si-wing. Thank you. Chairman. Well, there is no cash handout in the budget. But I think that the distribution of surplus has taken into account the needs of the majority of Hong Kong and also grassroots, elderly, etc. And there are also people who do not benefit a lot from your budget and they are aggrieved. So, Financial Secretary, I hope that you will give us a proper explanation and will also consider making certain appropriate adjustments. From the perspective of the tourism industry, in the previous 2 years, for travel agencies and hotels, they enjoyed license fee waivers. This year, you no longer offer a waiver and the industry is disappointed. About business registration fee, the point mentioned by the other member, I hope that you consider making an adjustment. And about allocation to the ocean park, as we all know, it is difficult for the ocean park to adopt the strategy as a tourism attraction because it will lack the edge. Instead, it should focus on conservation and ecotourism, and $300 million will be allocated to the ocean park. I think this is an appropriate allocation so that ocean park is not merely a tourist attraction for making a profit, so that it can also take up its responsibility of conservation. So I think that the allocation is right. My question is this. The budget will allocate an additional $396 million to the Hong Kong Tourism Board and $226 million to the Hong Kong Tourism Board and also some other another $30 million for the Tourism Travel Industry Council, but there is no objective stated. And how funding should be used? What's the consideration? Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Yu Si-wing, for your questions. Regarding the tourism industry, we're going to allocate some $300 million, out of which $200+ million will be provided for the Hong Kong Tourism Board to implement the development blueprint for Hong Kong's tourism industry. The details are set out in the budget. We also provided funding for, as mentioned just now, the ocean park. In terms of tourism-related initiatives, apart from the Hong Kong Tourism Board, there are other initiatives. We only set out the salient points in the budget. In fact, after the meeting, I can task my colleagues to prepare a detailed paper for your information. Chairman, the tourism industry is facing keener competition from nearby cities. $140 million. That's not a big sum, and the budget doesn't detail how the funds should be used. Well, Mr. Yu Si-wing, the Tourism Commission is responsible for that. Well, I thought that you wanted more details, and I could provide the details after the meeting. So the Tourism Commission would coordinate regarding the use of the remaining fund together with recommendations. Right, and also some regular proposals. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Chairman, regarding the budget, as mentioned by Mr. James Toh, the Democratic Party's view is that we are not afraid of lacking resources, but that is not evenly distributed. We have 4 million in our working force, some $3.8 million in our working force, but only 1.8 million taxpayers. So close to 2 million workers are not taxpayers. They do not benefit from your tax concessions. They do not receive the triple, quadruple payments because they are not on social welfare. So for those earning $200,000 or less a year, they get a concession of $590, and upper band $200,000 to $300,000 a year. They get just several $1,000s tax concession. Whereas for 2 million taxpayers, they do not get any tax benefits at all. And for those 700,000 workers get less than $3,000 tax rebates. I don't see how you could say that you are returning wealth to the people. Clearly, 2.7 million people, that's not a small sum. Our party has this proposal. If you are minded to return wealth to the people and allow everyone to enjoy economic success, then you can use $6,000 as a baseline figure. If it goes beyond $6,000, then there will be no additional rebate. Whereas for those receiving $6,000 or less as tax rebates, you will make up for the shortfall. It's really that hard to tackle, because according to your budget, if you compare government spending and revenue, there will be $46.6 billion surplus. So you should seriously consider this idea. There should be a way to include grassroots workers not captured by your concessionary measures, so that you can return wealth to the people, so that you can implement you can improve governance. Financial Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wu, for your questions. As I reply to other members' questions, our view is that in terms of governance and the allocation of resources, we should not just focus on the distribution of the 40% of a surplus. Grassroots as well as the middle class need support. As for grassroots, we have been implementing various measures in the education and other arenas. Right, Financial Secretary, I agree. I agree with your philosophy on investing in the future. You have taken on board a lot of proposals from the Democratic Party. But my point is, when we're talking about sharing the economic success, how can we make sure that everyone gets a share? Because this is usually the problem with public finance or governance. We need to be careful, because 2.7 million people, as I mentioned just now, get only really a small sum from your tax rebates. I am asking whether you can make adjustments, because it will only account for $16 billion of the surplus in the next year. Your time is up, Mr. Edward Lau. Thank you, Chairman. I can tell Financial Secretary very clearly that when I interviewed the community yesterday, a lot of grassroots workers expressed disappointment in the budget. According to them, the Financial Secretary claims to invest in the future. They are concerned with the future as well, but they are already living in dire straits at the moment. They are waiting for a share of the economic success. However, the budget has left them out, and they are disappointed. No matter what future planning the government has, if there is a lack of trust from the public, I don't think anything is possible. We always say that we support the government in developing the economy, but when the economy is good, they do not get they are not shared with the fruit of economic success, so it is meaningless to them. We have a record high surplus in this year's budget. I don't think it's just a windfall. This is the hard labor of the public. They have paid for the surplus because the income, the revenue came from land sale and the securities market. But the public bears the price as property prices and rental soars, but they do not get any benefit from the budget. It is said that you have failed to meet public expectation. You need to share the fruit of economic success with the people. And we expected the Financial Secretary to dish out goodies that can satisfy all. But from yesterday's opinion polls, everyone is unhappy. So, Financial Secretary, will you take any remedial action so that those who are not receiving triple payments of social welfare allowances and grassroots workers who do not get tax rebates can also get a share of the fruit of economic success?
Financial Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lau, for your questions and comments. Now, I have tried to answer a similar question many times just now. As we considered the budget, we try to keep our initiatives targeted so we could help those in need in the community. So members, as you consider this issue, you shouldn't just look at how we distribute the $50+ billion of surplus. Rather, for grassroots, whether they are receiving CSSAs or other assistance, we have various measures to help them in terms of education, social welfare, and so on. So as we consider the issue, we should look at the bigger picture. I can give you an example. Continuing Education Fund. Many told us there is keen competition. The people want to add value to themselves. No, I think Financial Secretary, the public would just want to share in directly. That's all. Healthcare, can you address the matter immediately? The public want immediate benefits. No, you have to please allow the Financial Secretary to finish. If you keep disrupting him like that, he cannot explain. Mr. Chairman, I won't dwell on anymore. Next, Dr. Priscilla Leung. In the next 5 years, those born in the 50s and 60s will become the elderly, or even earlier. Let's say if they retire at 35. So it is very important for this group who are originally taxpayers or in the middle class that they will not substantially add to the burden of the or they could become or they will slip into poverty, rather. Here we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people born in the 50s and 60s. I must thank the Financial Secretary for responding to my suggestion on annuities, life annuities for the elderly. That's good. And then for the age group of 60 and to 64, would you consider giving them the $2 transport concession as well? Because many of them have retired, they haven't found other jobs, they don't know what they want to do yet. Now you say there is subsidy for to retrain these people so they could switch to different trades. That's good because that will help to lessen the burden on the community. But these people, even if they want to be volunteers, the transportation costs are high. Now, so if you could offer them the $2 transport concession, it will probably lead to lesser burden on healthcare and so on. So you end up gaining, actually, rather than losing by offering this concession. Next is tax deductions for rent. Now, I must declare that I rent out properties too. Now, I'm just saying, say even for my colleagues, a couple may earn $30,000-$40,000 a month, and then they have to pay $16,000 or $17,000 in rent for a $300 square foot unit. So, tax deduction for rental expenses is the direct way to benefit them. a tax allowance, and the financial secretary said that he would consider it in the radio program today. But here we're talking about elderly without children. They don't have much savings, and so how will you do something for them? Families with a certain income limit, also for the retired especially, who still need to rent a place, that they really suffer. So would you offer them some direct assistance? Thank you, Dr. Leung. On rent subsidy, there is now a low vacancy rate in the rental market. If we offer rental assistance now, the rental assistance may lead to rental increase, so it's the own landlords who benefit, and there will be a rippling effect. For those who are not eligible for rental assistance, they will suffer too, because rentals will hike. That's why it's not the right circumstances to offer rent assistance. What about transport fare concessions? Now, right now, only those aged 65 or above are eligible for the transport concessions. Dr. Leung asked whether we could lower the age limit. Now, when we first started the scheme, we spent $200 to $300 million a year, but now it's over $1 billion because of the aging population. So we are concerned about the long-term burden of the scheme. Ms. Tanya Chen. Well, I must thank the Financial Secretary too, because he did accede to some of our demands. But then in some cases, it turns out to be neither here nor there. For example, electric vehicle, we want it to be one-for-one replacement. We want to encourage more vehicle owners to opt for electrical cars rather than petrol or diesel vehicles. We would like one-for-one replacement. Now there is a cap, and first time tax registration remains at $95,000 in terms of concession. So that's disappointing. You know, the Democratic camp does not support cash handout. More importantly, we hope that you will use your surplus wisely. Now we have a record high surplus. We have a record low unemployment rate. So you should plan for the long-term future of Hong Kong. For example, universal retirement protection, or you need to pay only several tens of billions of dollars, and this is the best time to do it because we're going to face an aging population and there will be problems with healthcare system and so on. I see you are investing in the healthcare system early. But what about universal retirement protection? There's no mention of that at all. And then we see that you are spending a lot on integration between the mainland and Hong Kong. For example, paragraph 69, $50 billion for innovation and technology, but actually $20 billion go to the River Loop Technology Park, and then $200 million to tourism board, to the Trade Development Council, and for Belt and Road, and the culture. The increase is to several tens of million dollars, but then for Bay Area exchanges, you will give $100 million. So we see you are spending money, right? But more importantly, it's about promoting integration. I don't see why it should be this unfair. Now, for arts groups, if they go overseas for exchanges or other places for exchanges, it's the same. It should be the same nature. How come if they go to Bay Area they get more in assistance? What sort of fiscal philosophy is that? So, do you have another tape to measure how you spend money? In other words, you have different sets of criteria. Thank you. Now, for electric vehicles, there's some cap on the waiving of first registration tax. Now we set it at $250,000. We believe it's right, and we're talking about mid-priced vehicles that will benefit the middle class. As for luxury electrical vehicles, if people want to buy them, I'm sure they have no problem paying the first registration tax. You know, before you lifted the concession measure, there are 95% in the market who buy the particular brand, so the price differential will be little. Anyway, I shouldn't disrupt you. Please go back to integration. River Loop Technology Park. That's the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Technology Park. We need to do phase 1 works, site formation, so on, that costs money. And in that particular park, we're talking about Hong Kong's companies who will move in there. And in culture, $40 million for the arts festivals to commission local artists in the local arts festivals. And so that's one example. And then there is also a location for promoting intangible cultural heritage. It's about Hong Kong again. And when arts groups go to other places to perform, yeah, we have received views on that. If it's to the mainland, it's a shorter trip, so they could make more trips there, and that's why people have made the request. At the same time, we also set aside money to help performing groups to perform outside of Hong Kong. But for people who go to mainland, which is nearby, it doesn't cost as much. But all in all, we're talking about encouraging artists to go and perform overseas, so there could be more exchanges. Mr. Eddie Chu. Many have demanded a cash handout before you deliver the budget. That should sound an alarm bell for you. That is, they have no expectation of the government on long-term measures. They know you won't work on universal retirement benefits. That's why they're giving you a last chance. And when you have money, then you should share it out evenly among the public. Now you see why there's so much criticism about your budget. Everyone's trying will monitor how you spend that $40+ billion, because you have a session that says sharing with the people. So definitely, I'm going to nail you to that, how you spend that $54 billion, because that doesn't involve policies at all. Now, you won't say that because now we are making triple payment for CSSA, there will be an impact on the CSSA policy. No, because it's one-off. In newspaper, that's headline saying that a barrister has benefited fully to the tune of $60,000, so he's going on a trip to celebrate that. Now, for public rental housing tenants, you say they get other benefits, so you won't waive their rent. But then here we're talking about barrister benefiting to the full from tax concessions, rates, waivers, and so on, and you don't see a problem with that. But then if you pay a bit more to public rental housing tenants, you see that as a problem. That's my reading anyway. So I have 3 questions. First of all, the $54 billion of surplus. Now, you say you have adopted a balanced approach in distributing that, but does it show your mindset? For those who pay more tax and rates, although they are small in number, but they are contributing more to Hong Kong. That's why for your $54 billion of surplus, 80% go to benefit them. For your $52.4 billion surplus. Now, 52.4 divided by 7 million or so, that means $7,000 each. So how come you're not giving $7,000 to everyone in Hong Kong, from a child to an elderly? Why is that not? That's not fairer than just giving handouts to a handful of people. I'm just talking about $52.4 billion. I won't even talk about other things. As my third question, do we have to find 35 members to give a counter proposal. That is, for the $52.4 billion, it should be distributed to everyone in the community, and only then could we and we would threaten to veto the budget. Only then would you listen and distribute $52.4 billion to everyone in the community. Is that the case?
Financial Secretary. Well, $7,000. Or should we give a cash handout of $7,000 to each? I do have a question mark here because, as I said just now, when sharing the surplus with the community, in terms of the grassroots, we have actually done a lot for CSSA recipients in the grassroots. Well, several million grassrooters, and then you spend $9 billion on them and you call it fair? Well, Mr. Chu, please stop. Let him answer first. Don't put more questions. It's just a yes or no answer. Ms. Eunice Yong. Well, I want to pick up on this point. I also note this issue. The barrister pays a tax of $20,000 only, and his wife is actually in insurance industry earning $100,000 a month. But not many barristers are as well off as that. Well, I welcome investment into 7 major areas such as I&T in particular, $50 billion, and also esports or e-gaming. We were catching up with the global trend. $100 million. As for tax concessions, well, you win the praise of the middle class because you have increased the allowances for dependent parents and children, and there will be a rates waiver for a year. As for young people who just joined the workforce, they criticize you a lot. And this morning, you have a lot of callers phoning in the radio program to criticize you. I wonder if you are ignoring these young people. How would the government meet the aspirations of these young people so that they have their own living space? I understand this morning the Financial Secretary responded by saying that they should start their own businesses. But Financial Secretary, not all young people are suitable to be entrepreneurs. They may not have the capital for it, or they may not have the character for it. So how are you going to meet the aspirations of having their own living space? Well, FS, your explanation for not implementing tax concession for rent to expenses is the computer system is not ready. I think this is just an excuse. Will you consider implementing the tax concession for rental expenses? FS, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Yong, for your questions. For our young people, I think the most important thing is to provide good opportunities for them to have quality employment options and career prospects. Starting their own business is one path, but not everyone is suitable for that. However, if we improve the economy, we can offer more employment choices for young people. There will be more development opportunities for their upward mobility, which is important for them. That is why for the CEF Continuing Education Fund, we have increased our injection so that those who apply with the CEF to enhance themselves will get a larger amount of subsidy. As for rental expenses and tax deduction, we are looking into the details. If we are to implement this proposal, we need to change our computer system, and this is a practical issue. In short, we, of course, attach much importance to the needs of our young people, and the Chief Secretary will be coordinating our work in youth development. And we've also allocated $1 billion in this regard, so that as we engage them in the discussion of politics and policies, how we can meet their needs. And we can discuss with the relevant stakeholders and our youths to see how the funds can best be utilized. And there is room for everyone to express your views, and there is also room for the relevant committees and commissions to follow up on the work. Thank you. Next, Mr. Charles Mock. Chairman, yesterday, Financial Secretary, after you delivered the budget speech, as you came out, well, the media said that this budget has benefited the R&T a lot. $50 billion for the R&T industry, and also for Dr. Pierre Chan for the healthcare industry, $30 billion. But we should not just talk about figures. And I think everyone has the same response as the members of the public. Is everyone getting a share of the economic success? That's not true. For $50 billion, well, $20 billion will be spent on the Lok Ma Chau Loop. Well, let's not discuss whether the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Technology Park will really benefit everyone in the future. This is, in fact, another property project. Well, funding is necessary, but you should not package it as a mere R&T initiative. We do not have enough doctors, we need more healthcare services, and we need a new hospital. Of course, that's the right argument. But you should not lead people into thinking that the several dozen $billion will be spent on meeting the needs of the industry, because after all, it's the construction industry that benefits. In the past 3 years, for fundings earmarked for R&T, if my calculations are correct, it has exceeded $80 billion. But I do have some questions. First, for the funds earmarked, how much is put to use? For the funds earmarked 3 years ago, we've just begun to set up initiatives for people to apply for the funds. And despite the hefty investment, we're still being criticized for lagging behind. Is it true that we are falling behind? The answer is no. The issue has to do with red tape. The government has not begun to remove red tape. And also for the continuing education fund is not included in the $50 billion. The amount will be increased from 10,000 to 20,000, and then the age limit will be relaxed to 70 years old. But you haven't resolved the crux of the matter. That is, the courses are packed to the QF, which is a major obstacle. Second point, there are so many online courses which are free, but subsidy should be provided for the license examination fees. And your answer is no. I discussed with the Labour and Welfare Bureau, but I do have the feeling that the government is only facilitating its own policy formulation, but not the public. For rental expenses deduction, you put the blame on the computer system, and that is not ready. But this should not be the way forward. You should formulate the policy first and then change the computer system as soon as possible. You should at least formulate the policy, and then in a year or 2 years' time, it can be implemented. Financial Secretary, thank you, Mr. Charles Mok, for your question. For the Lok Ma Chau Loop, Mr. Mok, you should understand that in terms of developing innovation technology, we need a vehicle. So that means we need a physical property. And we need to make investment for building this property. For the $20 billion, it includes the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Technology Park and the first phase of its construction. As for the funds earmarked, the progress for some projects is slow. For example, for InnoCell, we only got approval very recently from the Legislative Council. And also for there are other initiatives. For example, in 2020, the Data Analytics Center will be completed, and there will also be advanced There will also be an advanced manufacturing base which will be completed, an advanced manufacturing center. It will be completed in 2022. So what you say is right. when we set up the IT policy unit, we'll follow up on these matters. As for the CEF, the eligibility criteria and the scope, we take note of your comments and we'll go back and discuss with the Labour and Welfare Bureau. We are approaching the time for adjourning the meeting, but I will extend the meeting with Mr. Lau Yip Keung and Mr. Lam Chak Ting and Chen Chi-chun. Mr. Kenneth Lau. Chairman, I think that this budget, as the first budget delivered since this administration takes office, is a very pragmatic one, and is also sharing the economic success with all. And on innovation and technology, I agree with the government that we need to diversify our economy. We should not just focus on the four-pillar industries. I think the I&T is the highlight around the world, and this is the leading trend. So in terms of the Lok Ma Chau Loop, when will the first phase of the Hong Kong Shenzhen IT Park be completed? Because this is the aspiration of the community. In the medium to long term, has the government gauged the effectiveness of this investment? FS, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lau, for your question. For the first phase of the R&T Park, we're working on it full steam. They will be applying for funding with electrical in due course. It is expected that in 2021 and 2022, the site should be handed over for use, and then relevant facilities will be built on this site. Depending on the enterprises that may be based in this park, our estimation of the economic benefit brought about by the Lok Ma Chau Loop should not be done merely on the basis of the first phase, because it has more than one phase. And when we provide the hardware, we'll be able to attract international and mainland renowned enterprises and I&T corporations to set up their base in Hong Kong, which will bring jobs to Hong Kong and also more job opportunities for engineering and I&T students in Hong Kong. So the benefit is multifaceted. I'd like to follow up on that. That means you're referring to large corporations, mature corporations that will be based in the R&T park, whereas for I&T industry, it's mostly young people and business startups with bringing in new concepts that may be beyond our grasp. So I wonder whether you can make more effort in considering support for these young people, because many young people may work from home. They may not wish to work in the Lok Ma Chau Loop, and they may set up a home office. What support can you give them? In terms of co-working space, we do encourage that. In the community, we see that more and more NGO or non-profit making organizations are setting up co-working spaces. For those who would like to, or for young people who would like to start their own business, we provide support in the park. We also provide help in other areas, such as free advice, seminars, and opportunities for them to gather and exchange ideas and share experiences. So we'll continue with the effort. Mr. Ray Chan. Chairman, in the past 2 days, the question often put to the to Mr. Paul Chan by the public, by the media, is why not cash handouts? Now, the people power doesn't call it cash handouts. We say return money to the people, because the revenue comes mostly from stamp duty and land sale, and land belongs to everyone. Without the land, you don't have the high land price policy, but this is the brunt we bear. This is the outcome. Well, John Tsang was criticized as a miser. In 2011, the surplus was $75 billion, and then $37 billion was spent on giving cash handouts or returning the money to everyone. Each got $6,000. What about the surplus this year? $138 billion, as said by Paul Chan yesterday. That's his estimate, because as of January, according to the administration's paper, our surplus should be $165 billion. So when he forecasted a deficit in March, the surplus turned out to be $138 billion. In fact, the actual surplus should be $165.2 billion. So sharing the fruit of economic success, it really gets on the nerves of the public, because we have so much anger outside the chamber, even more than inside the chamber. We did not throw anything at you. We did not even criticize you or scold you inside the chamber. But the members of the public have been calling our ward officers, regardless of which camp they they're in, whether they're pro-government or not. Well, even for the pro-government camp, they criticized you. In fact, the post was shared over 1,000 times. It never happened to me before. And I was asked whether I would filibuster. I said that no more filibuster in the chamber. Well, Financial Secretary, of course, is not your belief that there should be cash handouts for all. We should not take the across-the-board approach. In 2011, when John Tsang was asked for, came to the LegCo for additional funding for the cash handout of $6,000 for all, you voted for it. But in fact, if you did not believe in it, you should have voted against it. And then you said that there should be cash handouts for everyone, because it's a windfall for everyone, including new arrivals, etc. What about this windfall on this occasion? Of course, distribution would never be even, but in fact, some of them get nothing at all. That's the point. We have CSSA recipients receiving triple payment. We have cash rebates for LegCo members, $30,000. Matthew Cheung, the Chief Secretary, he has 9 properties, so he would get a raise rebate of 120 of such a large sum of money. So in 2011, when Paul Chan was still a legislator in the council, when John Tsang came for additional funding of $7.1 billion, according to the media, what he said was that cash handouts should be given to everyone, including new arrivals. We should not differentiate between different people. And if that is true, we now have the consensus across different political parties. We give you time. Come back on Monday. Give us an improved proposal. Cash handouts, would you consider that? FS. Thank you, Chairman. Regarding the surplus this year, Mr. Chan said as of January this year, it stands as it stood at $160 billion, and in March the surplus would be even higher. But that's not true. Every month we need to take into account our expenditure as well. The tax revenue has been received in January, so we believe the estimate to be accurate, or to be rather accurate. As for cash handouts for all, other members already touched on this point and already gave a reply. Mr. Leung Chi-Cheong. Thank you, Chairman. The DAB told the media our viewpoint on the budget. We believe that the government is dedicated in investing into the future, but not making enough effort in sharing the fruit of economic success. I received a lot of messages last night on WhatsApp, and I think that the major comment on this proposal is that it's a lack of even distribution of the surplus, because we have PRH tenants who are in employment. They are middle-aged, but they do not earn enough to pay tax. so they do not get any share of the fruit of economic success. What about rates rebates? In a year, how much are we talking about? So many workers are disappointed. The government is having such a huge surplus, and you're dishing out several dozen $billion, but so many people get so little, and most of them are in the grassroots level. I agree that for the middle class and for those contributing really a lot to society, they deserve the concessions. However, for the grassroots, according to your budget, they don't get a share of the economic success. So, as Financial Secretary, would you consider doing something else apart from this budget? Is there any room for maneuvering? For example, the Community Care Fund, apart from those households having hardship, can more support be provided to show the government's care? It has nothing to do with the amount of support. Well, just now, Mr. Ray Chen said that Mr. Matthew Cheung would get a rebate of $120,000. I don't know whether this is really the sum, but for this group, they are not respected by the government. They are not looked after by the government, and they don't get any benefit. So can you show some care to preserve the dignity? Now, another comment is this. Financial Secretary, you have, through this budget, divided the community into different strata, and you are tearing them farther away from each other. And even your supporters have begun to show negative resentment, because people are not happy with how you share the fruit of economic success. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong has asked me to ask this question. He hasn't seen it before, ever. But in the second reading of the budget, he wonders whether any amendment can be made.
Was there ever such precedent? Financial Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Leung, for your questions. Other members of the DAB have raised the same points. I've responded to those points already. When we prepared the budget and the arrangement for distributing the $50+ billion of surplus, we took a holistic view. We considered other measures too in the budget. Now, I'm asking whether it's possible to amend the appropriation bill. Anyway, time is up. I would like to thank the Financial Secretary and others for coming to the meeting. The Finance Committee will resume at 2 p.m.